All right, party people, we are back for another nutrient series. I don't know why I started with an M instead of an N. I think I was going to say nutrients series, but that obviously is incorrect. We're here talking about vitamin B6 in all of our awkward glory. Say hi to Amy. Hi, Amy.
Hello. How's everyone doing today?
Save me from myself. Hi, Amy.
Hi. It's very Eeyore-esque
dietitian. Dietitian in the group. B6, is it like important?
It is. It really is. I think again, like,
all right, that's a wrap, folks.
Pretty much.
Are people going to get sick of that introduction, by the way? I think I've done that every single episode now for this series.
Your shtick now.
It is. It's fully my shtick.
Yes.
But continue your thoughts. Sorry.
Yeah. I mean, I think like a lot of the other nutrients, it's going to play a role in energy metabolism. And, you know, it's interesting because before these, I always kind of go to Chris Masterjohn's site because he has really nice, like, summaries of each nutrient just to jog my memory. And he also gives each one a nickname. Okay. And he calls vitamin B6 the magician, because it can kind of like, he was saying it can make protein into carbs. It can change different amino acids to other amino acids. It can synthesize or like make neurotransmitters, you know, from
like
amino acids. Yeah, it can make, he says it can make protein disappear, which I basically think what he's describing is it could make ammonia turn into urea, which is like ammonia is kind of a toxic byproduct of protein metabolism. He can kind of make that into something non-toxic. B6 can make it into something non-toxic. But I thought that was kind of an interesting analogy, the magician.
It's kind of cute, honestly. Magician.
He has other ones too. I don't know if I've always said them.
I don't think so.
He says thiamin's the carb burner, riboflavin's the fat burner. Niacin was the nicknameless foundation of all energy metabolism and repair. Pantothenic acid he calls the mystery vitamin. And then B6 is the magician.
Okay. Well, we're going to make it mandatory. You have to share these nicknames every time
I know that I
come on here.
Yeah. But yeah, I think again, there's a lot of different things that kind of come to my mind when I think of B6 specifically too. I think the neurotransmitter one is sort of like a popular one in my head that kind of comes to mind that people know more about maybe, is that, you know, it can definitely maybe affect mood and mental health if B6 gets depleted. I think of too sleep. Sleep is something that I've seen it in a lot of like sleep supplements because it's important for the synthesis of serotonin.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that neurotransmitter thing again.
Yeah, neurotransmitter thing again. Because again, serotonin becomes melatonin. So yeah, I think that that's something that I see it talked about. I see it talked a lot about just because I'm in the stage of life, pregnancy. Even it's discussed in PMS too. It seems like if you have elevated estrogen levels, you have higher needs of B6. So some people that are even on oral contraceptives might need more B6.
Yep.
But again, like it's important for estrogen metabolism and detoxification. So if you're, you know, dealing with any sort of menstrual related issues, B6 can sometimes help with like menstrual cramps, PMS type symptoms.
And in pregnancy, it's used for nausea, I think, right?
Correct. For nausea. So yeah, it's going to have a lot of different roles, but those are the ones I feel like that are the most popular. And we can talk about some of the other ones too that might be a little lesser known.
Yeah, and maybe a starting point for this episode too is briefly touching on the idea of like how common deficiency is and who might be at higher risk, because I feel like this is another one that doesn't get talked about a lot. Like everybody and their brother talks about folate and B12 and thiamine, But as we've said with the last few vitamins in the series, hardly anybody is really talking about riboflavin, niacin, pantothenic acid, and now pyridoxine. But interestingly enough, like I'm going to refer to 2 sources for this information here just to kind of wet our whistle. So I've mentioned this, I think, in every episode of this series so far, but in the Nutrivore book, the copy that I have, it's on page 10, but Sarah Ballantyne has a nice chart of the prevalence of nutrient insufficiencies. So inadequate dietary intake for different vitamins and minerals. There are some, like vitamin D and potassium, where it's 100% of the population or damn near 100% of the population. And there are some where, like selenium, only about 1% of the population is under consuming selenium, which I thought was interesting too. But, B6, for all that it's not talked about all that much, is higher up on the list. They estimated this study 25.5% of people are under consuming vitamin B6. So that could be a potential big deal, especially if you start getting into some of these populations where deficiency could be more problematic. And then also I wanted to share in the same kind of breath, hold on, where is it? There was a study that I found at some point, I put it in one of the articles for FODMAP Freedom, and I'm going to pull it up real quick, is that about 30% of patients with inflammatory bowel disease, IBD, so this would be like Crohn's and colitis, show evidence of a vitamin B6 deficiency. So remember, the first chart, 25 some odd percent of the population is not consuming enough vitamin B6 in their diet. But in this case, we have a disease population, IBD, and about a third of those people show evidence of an overt deficiency, like they measured their blood, they didn't have enough in their blood. Now, that's going to be more of an issue with a malabsorptive condition like Crohn's, celiac disease, etc. But that is the first population that could be at higher risk of B6 deficiency. Can you think of any other populations where this might be particularly risky?
And interestingly enough, before we move on from the IBD conversation, I did see a study looking at IBD patients and what happens in groups that are more B6 deficient, and like what's going on with the IBD and like the actual disease process that's going on. It seems like people that are more B6 deficient had more inflammation, and what they sort of try to figure out why, specifically related to the B6, and they found that there was much more pro-inflammatory cytokines versus anti-inflammatory cytokines in the B6 deficient group. So it's like changing immune function in some way.
That makes sense. I know that there's some interplay with like steroid hormones, which would include the sex hormones that we briefly paid homage to earlier. So estrogen, testosterone, progesterone, but also cortisol, the so-called stress hormone. And like cortisol affects the immune system very greatly.
Right.
Here's a follow-up tidbit to that tidbit is a different paper that I mentioned in FODMAP Freedom shows, they said vitamin B6 deficiency disrupts Th1, Th2 balance and tips toward an excessive Th2 response resulting in allergy. And if you think about how a lot of autoimmune conditions and a lot of like inflammatory conditions present, a lot of them are tipped more towards that Th2 allergic, histamitic, like overreactive to everything kind of response immunologically versus Th1, which would be more like antiviral immunity, anti-cancer immunity. So I thought that was interesting. And then they further say vitamin B6 regulates lymphocyte trafficking into the intestines, especially in the large intestine. Therefore, vitamin B6 is important, has an important role for immunosurveillance in the intestines. And that to me translates as this vitamin not only helps with immune function overall, but it helps you manage your critter load in the intestines. And isn't that what 99% of our listeners want to do. Like they want to manage their intestinal critters more effectively, and they want to have a more symbiotic, friendly relationship with the microbes in their intestines. So vitamin B6 might be genuinely important for that.
Yeah, and I think it can be sort of a vicious cycle too, because the more inflammation you have, the more B6 you need. and it seems like people with more inflammatory conditions could be more prone to B6 deficiency. So, it's one of those nutrients, if you have a more of an inflammatory conditions like IBD or autoimmunity, you might be more depleted in it. I think, to play off another thing that you were talking about the histamine or like more allergenic type reactions that can come in a B6 deficient state if you're tipping more the Th2 avenue. B6 is so important in histamine breakdown, I should say, getting rid of excess histamine. People that maybe do swing a little bit more histamine intolerant, or that are presenting in that way where they're kind of extra reactive to things could be B6 deficient, and it could be something to look into, or to see if B6 supplementation helps with those symptoms at all. Could be something to look into. Yeah.
And I will share too, to kind of wrap up the section of like who could be at greater risk. Again, acknowledging like 25% of the broader population seems to be under consuming this nutrient. And then we start getting into like people with malabsorptive conditions like IBD or celiac disease. Quick plug, if you've been diagnosed with SIBO, the variety of SIBO you have probably is not causing malabsorption. That's a whole topic for another day. I have YouTube videos covering that exact topic of why SIBO does not cause malabsorption in the vast majority of people. So if you're curious about that, you can learn more. But also, you had mentioned oral birth control pills, like estrogen-based birth control, increases your need for B6. Alcohol abuse. I feel like alcohol abuse and like alcoholism increase your need for, or increase your excretion for pretty much everything. Because I feel like that's like the running gag at this point, that it keeps coming up again and again.
Right.
But that was another one that came up in, my research on this as I was brushing up for this conversation. Let me look at one more thing.
One other one too, is people that are eating more plant-based or relying on plant-based sources to get B6. Like a lot of nutrients, they're just not it's not the active form. So it's going to take more resources to convert it into the active form versus getting it from animal products. So like not to say someone needs to be slamming meat to get B6, because that's not true. They don't need to be eating carnivore. But if you're eating plant-based and all your B6 is coming from plant-based sources, you could run the risk of being lower in B6 compared to someone who is more omnivorous. And I will say too, this is one thing that Chris Masterjohn points out. The more protein that you eat, potentially the more B6 you need as well. I mean, it's a good thing a lot of proteins have B6, but that's maybe another extreme too. Like if you're eating pretty high protein, you might need more B6, likely from like the ammonia urea situation. If you're creating a lot of ammonia from protein breakdown, you might need more B6 to make that conversion to the more non-toxic form. This is something like, I don't know if you've ever worked with anyone dealing with this. I feel like I might have had it at some points. It could have been more related to blood sugar stuff too. I'm not totally sure. But sometimes people that are eating higher protein have like a little bit of a stanky stank. Nikki's holding her nose. But yeah, I mean, I think that there can be like this like smell in people that eat a little bit of a higher protein, and that might be like a sign that you might need a little bit more B6. I swear I feel like I had a little bit of that, and I wonder if it was more protein or blood sugar related. It seemed like it was more when I was like low carb, so I'm not totally sure. It could have been one or the other, but it's not pleasant. That's for sure. So if you feel like
I noticed the moment I met you, Amy.
The stank?
The stank.
Okay.
No, I'm kidding.
Because we're this is why we had to be podcasters from
at
afar.
a distance.
Yes. So yeah, there is like that situation for people that are maybe a little bit too high on the protein spectrum. You might need more B6 for the detoxification of that level of protein.
It's such a good point. And I want to double back too to I think we're talking about the two ends of the spectrum here. Like we've got the plant-based eaters on one end, and then you just kind of talked about the heavy protein eaters, the heavily like meat eaters potentially needing more B6. Going back though to the plant-based bit, as you mentioned, a lot of B vitamins are more abundant in animal foods, or the form that's found in animal foods is going to be easier for us to process. Chris Masterjohn, I feel like we've mentioned his name 15 times this episode already, but he made a point in one of his videos of saying that the form of vitamin B6 found in plant foods has to be converted to its active form. And to do that, that is going to be highly dependent on the state of your microbiome. So it kind of brings up this idea, like, if you are a heavily plant-based eater and you have dysbiosis and gut problems, right? Like anybody listening to this podcast, that could be potentially a bad combination. And then, we've all seen those people who just are kind of stuck on their diet and they're not willing to change their diet for the sake of healing their gut. And they don't see the importance here, but it could be that a plant-based diet and dysbiosis don't go well together.
Yeah. Well, and the plant-based diet relies on riboflavin to activate the pyridoxine into pyridoxal, which is like sort of the more active form.
Well, and another point too, just to share, is that one of the things that came up when I was refreshing my memory for this episode is the fact that you need alkaline phosphatase in the gut to digest and absorb B6, and that is a zinc-dependent enzyme. So there's another nutrient that is commonly deficient, or at least insufficient, in a heavily plant-based diet.
So get your zinc, people, and your riboflavin, and your B6, and your
get all of the
and your
things.
niacin. You're right.
That's sort of the point of this whole series, right? Is like, no vitamin or mineral is necessarily like more important than the others. Again, everybody and their brother is talking about folate and B12, and I need the methylfolate because I have MTHFR, and I need the thiamine because of XYZ. And it's like, no, dude, they all work together. You need all of these things. Again, like riboflavin works with B6. Like you need zinc to absorb and digest your B6. Like, you know, and remember, you need vitamin B6 to convert, to make niacin. Remember in the niacin episode, we were talking about how our bodies can actually produce some niacin. Well, that is a B6 dependent process, making niacin in your body. So there's a lot of these connections with other nutrients. So if you're deficient in one, you're probably going to have a domino effect affecting a lot of these other pieces of your body.
Right. Well, and again, I think, another interesting aspect of that too is like talking about just, where we put a lot of stock in like certain nutrients get so much press. We think about like B12 and iron and folate get talked about with anemia. Well, B6 can also lead, B6 deficiency could potentially lead to anemia too, because it's important for making hemoglobin. So like, I think there are so many different ways that this could kind of interrelate. Even something like homocysteine can increase if B6 is deficient, but it doesn't get tons of press in that conversation too. It gets more, I would say, than maybe the anemia conversation, but still it's like, oh, there's all the nutrients are important, and I'm glad we're shining a light on some from some lesser popular nutrients.
The forgotten stepchild of the nutrient world. I feel like
Yes.
B5 and B6 are pretty high up there in that
Yes.
ranking. And to briefly share on that point too. So when you eat protein, particularly animal protein, you get a lot of the amino acid methionine. And that methionine is converted into homocysteine. And then we've all seen that picture, right? From like textbooks and stuff, like of the homocysteine cycle going round and round. And we know that you need like B12 and folate and zinc and like some of these nutrients to process your homocysteine. And typically this nutrient is, or this molecule is talked about in regard to cardiovascular disease risk. Like you don't want homocysteine to be too high. But also at the bottom of that homocysteine cycle that gets pictured are two B6 dependent enzymes. And they are going to help you take that homocysteine and make it into cysteine, which is one of the things that you need for production of glutathione. And this could be another thing tying B6 into the inflammation and the immune signaling kind of piece of this puzzle, because glutathione is your master detoxifier. It's your most abundant, most important intracellular antioxidant. It helps with immune balance and immune function. It helps with kind of teaching the immune system to chill the fuck out and not attack everything. So inducing immune tolerance. That's what they say in research, like chill the fuck out. Obviously, that's the technical term.
Yes.
But glutathione is super, super important for people with inflammatory or autoimmune conditions. And again, like if you're not making glutathione because you don't have the cysteine, because you are vitamin B6 deficient and you're not running those enzymes, then, the slippery slope we slide, people.
Well, and even just to kind of like pull back again, people are probably annoyed, like, we get it, the nutrition's important. But just pulling back again, looking at the people that we typically work with, they're coming to us saying, here, look at my GI map. Look at this Pseudomonas on this GI map. Like, this is the sole problem right here. Look
Look
at that.
Give a rat's ass about your Pseudomonas.
Right. Look at that Pseudomonas. And it's like, okay, but when we look at someone's nutrition and there's like 7 nutrients that are depleted and they don't have enough calories and like they're not producing ATP and their gut literally doesn't have the resources to monitor Pseudomonas. Like Pseudomonas is such a drop in the bucket. And I think it's just a good example of how things are often oversimplified. Not to say it's super complicated. I think in the grand scheme of things, getting all your nutrients is important. Now, it might take some work to get there, and I don't think you have to do it in one foul swoop if you're coming from a place of depletion. But like to basically say that like all your symptoms are due to SIBO or Pseudomonas or Candida or whatever it is, I think it gets people into trouble because it just has them hyper-focused on the wrong things instead of some of these bigger things that, all work together to create a more resilient body, like the nutrients. Yeah.
And I agree with you. People place a great deal of importance on the microbes and the faulty stool testing, like the GI map or like the MOAT, the microbial oat.
Yeah.
But yeah, you bring up like, wow, you're hella deficient in this nutrient or 2 or 3 or 4 or 10 nutrients. And they're like, okay, I'll just take a multivitamin.
Right.
And that segues perfectly into the question, oh, dietitian. So do you think that okay, so like B6 is important, whoop-de-fucking do. So we just take a B6 supplement and then we're done with it, right? Like simple, bada bing.
I mean, I guess someone could do that. I think, again, from my standpoint, do you want to supplement your whole life? I also think, again, like there can be excess that might not be good. So again, I think from my standpoint, if someone's deficient, I would probably lean more heavily on the animal-based form, the P5P. I think it works a little bit better from what I've seen clinically. Doesn't mean that the peroxidine HCl, I think that's what it typically is in the
pyridoxine HCl, I think.
Pyridoxine HCl isn't like, I think it could still work just fine. I think if you're playing around with B6, I might do the active form. I'd still probably start at a slightly lower dose. Like some of them are 50. I usually start people out at like 25. I think that's usually like the lower of the dose.
Yeah.
And then I kind of monitor it for a little bit. I don't think someone really needs to be on high B6, especially the active form, all the time. I think there's potential to go overboard with it too.
Well, and B6, at the beginning of the episode when you were saying, oh, I think people know B6 for X, Y, and Z, like sleep and neurotransmitters, I was also thinking this, but I didn't want to start the episode with this. I feel like a lot of people are aware of vitamin B6 toxicity. Not as many people pay attention to the potential of a deficiency. But I've had people, and there was one guy actually in FODMAP Freedom this time around where he sounds like he really had B6 deficiency, and he like went to the hospital and everything. And that there have been many more cases where people tell me that they have B6 toxicity and they are convinced that they have B6 toxicity, but there's no like plausible reason why that would have happened. Like they were eating foods with B6. But I think that is one point in favor of trying to get this nutrient from food rather than supplements is if you're getting this nutrient from food, you're getting like a milligram or 2 a day.
Right.
And you're staying well below that tolerable upper limit versus if you start getting into some of these higher dose supplements and really pushing it, you could, and like a form, the form might matter in this too.
Right.
You might really push yourself into a B6 toxicity situation. And while that will subside after the cessation of the supplement, like at least per the research we have on it, that's not a fun thing to go through. And like the neuropathy and the stuff that you get with that. So if we could try to focus on foods, we're much less likely to get toxicity and side effects and crazy shit if we get our nutrients from food. And, I think in the last episode we mentioned, that higher doses of vitamin B5 and vitamin B7 can compete with each other for absorption. And so if you take like a shit ton of biotin, you might throttle down your B5 absorption or vice versa.
Right. Yeah, we just don't know. There's probably so much we don't even know about how.
I don't know of any interactions like that for B6, but just because we haven't discovered it yet, or just because we haven't researched it yet, that doesn't mean such an interaction might not exist, right? Like, so again, I think that from a, safety, metabolism, absorption kind of standpoint, it makes the most sense to get food-based nutrients, but also I don't know if this is necessarily the case with B6, but oftentimes the form that is found in a supplement is not the same form found in nature. And it's not going to be packaged together with all of like the nice cofactors and the nice things that make that vitamin work better.
Yeah.
So like vitamin E is a good example, and we'll talk about this when we get there. I think vitamin E makes the best example of this. So when you get a vitamin product, like a supplement, and it is labeled vitamin E, if you look at the ingredient list, it's alpha tocopherol. That's almost universally what you're going to get in that product. And that's fine. But the thing is, vitamin E found in nature, found in food like almonds and wheat, is going to be a combination of 4 tocopherol compounds and 4 tocotrienol compounds.
Right.
And together, all 8 of those compounds are what we call vitamin E in food. So it's like, okay, the human ego, right? Like the science ego of it all. We, some scientist in a white lab coat sucked the alpha tocopherol out of an almond and was like, Eureka, we got it. We don't need to eat those stupid almonds anymore. Let's synthesize it, boys.
Yeah.
And then it's marketed to people who and I don't mean this in a judgmental way, but marketed to people who don't know any better, and it's labeled as vitamin E, and the public by and large doesn't realize that the stuff they're getting in a multivitamin, even the good multivitamins, is not going to be the same as food. It never will be.
Yeah.
So,
well, and I even think another potential con to supplements is this was like a recent study in JAMA. I just pulled it up, where they found that only 11% of supplements accurately contain the labeled ingredients, which is just kind of nuts.
that's a little scary.
It is a little scary. It says 40% contain no detectable amount of listed ingredients at all, which is wild. 12% had at least one FDA prohibited ingredient. 49% contain the ingredients on the label in amounts that were either significantly higher or lower than they claimed to be on the label. So it is kind of like there is a little bit of a rolling the dice. Now, again, I think you can limit that by choosing like a supplement that might have like third-party testing or but still.
And not getting it through Amazon.
Yeah, still.
Like that came up again recently. I think I shared it with some FODMAP Freedom students. I think there was a study that looked at supplements on Amazon specifically, and a lot of them are counterfeit, and a lot of them do not contain what you think they contain.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Yeah, and we sound like we're crapping on supplements, and we kind of are, but I will be forthcoming. Like, I take some supplements most days.
For sure.
Like I take, vitamin D and fish oil, and I take like a B complex or something a lot of the time. And I have my husband taking a multi and a fish oil and a vitamin D, and we both take magnesium at night. And, it's not that supplements are bad. It's just, again, try to get most of what you need through food, and then just use supplements strategically to kind of like patch things up. I was just thinking this morning, so my daughter is sort of addicted to her dad's homemade breakfast sausage patties. Like, he gets the ground meat, and he puts all the herbs and spices in it and lets it sit, and then he grills them, and then he makes them in giant batches and freezes them so we could just pull them out as need be. And I usually put a drop or two of vitamin D on her nice fatty sausage, right? Increase absorption. And then more recently, I've been putting a drop or two of vitamin E on her sausage too, because I had gotten a liquid vitamin E supplement for myself since I don't eat wheat, and I don't eat so many nuts and seeds that I feel like I get enough on a daily basis.
Right.
So I had started taking a little bit extra myself, while still making an effort to eat more almonds and eat more sunflower seeds, and, trying to do it the smart way too, but just, kind of acknowledging the limitation of my gluten-free diet. Similarly, I just was thinking this morning when I dropped the vitamin E on my daughter's sausage, I realized, she really doesn't eat nuts or seeds ever. And she does eat wheat, but maybe I should throw a drop or two in for her too.
Yeah, for sure. I think, supplements are totally fine. I agree. I think just simply relying on them, though, too much, like we were saying, is probably not the best option. I think getting a variety of different foods for nutrients is going to be your best bet to avoid getting any gaps in nutrition or any outright deficiencies. There's a couple things I wanted to mention too about B6. We already mentioned some stuff gut-wise, just that it helps the immune system in the gut, favor more anti-inflammatory pathways versus pro-inflammatory pathways. And interestingly enough, supplementation has been shown to downregulate inflammatory cytokines. So again, if there was an outright deficiency and someone did supplement, it does seem to help lower inflammation in the gut. B6 deprivation studies, so when they specifically are leaving out B6, probably in a major way. So this wouldn't necessarily be just a little deficient, but we can still sort of examine what happens when they do this in studies. But B6 deprivation studies have shown a decrease in mucus secreting cells in the gut, and we need a nice thick mucosal layer to keep our gut happy and healthy. It's sort of like that protective shield in the gut. IBS is more associated with mucus related inflammation. Now, sometimes there can be outright permeability, kind of like inflammation further down. But like the mucus sort of helps protect the gut. So again, if we're getting depletion in mucus secreting cells, that could lead to less mucosal barrier and less protection in the gut and more inflammation as well. Some studies also point to lower short chain fatty acids with lower B6 levels. There's been some studies, like it does seem to impact the microbiome in some way. But I honestly think I think to view it as like, oh, the B6 just automatically changes the microbiome. I think it's more like the B6 changes how the gut is functioning, which then leads to changes in the microbiome most of the time. Now, again, there could be a little bit of like the certain microbes use B6, so there could be some of that, but I still think probably the bigger effect would be, how it's impacting the gut barrier function and gut lining, immune function, and things like that really impacts the microbiome in major ways.
Yeah, it's maybe it's not changing the microbiome directly, but it's changing the relationship you have with the microbes and like how you manage them.
Yeah,
Maybe
it's like changing the environment around the microbiome.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. And again, there's so many things that will indirectly affect the gut too. So, we touched lightly on hormone function or cortisol function, and hormones like estrogen and cortisol especially really profoundly affect gut function. So that's an indirect link, potentially linking this to your gut. I think also we mentioned in the beginning of the episode, but maybe we need to focus on it for another moment, is neurotransmitter synthesis. Like we talk about the gut-brain axis, right? And for all that B5 got the spotlight last time because of the link with making acetylcholine, and we said acetylcholine is like the neurotransmitter of the vagus nerve, which it is. However, where do you think the vagus nerve gets its stimulation from, right? Not everybody is walking around with one of those vagus nerve zapper stimulator things on their neck. There's something else higher up stimulating the vagus nerve, and it's the rest of your brain.
Yeah.
It's the rest of your nervous system. So if you are potentially not making enough serotonin or dopamine or GABA in the brain and the rest of the nervous system, that can absolutely directly affect the vagus nerve. And then remember, kids, remember what the vagus nerve does. Pretty much everything from like the collarbones down to, your pelvis, more or less, but secretion of stomach acid, secretion of bile, secretion of digestive enzymes, healing of the gut lining, aka leaky gut, regulating the level of inflammation in all of the tissues in the abdomen, including the accessory organs of digestion like the liver and even hell, the spleen. The spleen is under there. We forget about the poor spleen. There's motility. Oh my God. Motility is huge. Stomach emptying, MMC. So the vagus nerve is pretty freaking important. And again, if those neurotransmitters are not up to snuff because of B6 deficiency, you're going to have a hard time activating that vagus nerve.
Yeah, I even just think too, more broadly from a neurotransmitter standpoint, so many people that we work with struggle with mental health stuff, depression, anxiety, and even sort of hypervigilant type issues. IBS seems to be more linked to hypervigilance, that sort of thing. And I definitely think your neurotransmitters play a role in how hypervigilant you are. Now, again, I think that the brain's really interesting, like the way we behave, or not the way we behave, kind of our mindset around things can dictate how the brain is wiring. Like it's sort of it's not just the neurotransmitter. So like, I don't want someone to be like, I'm anxious, like all I have to do is take a B6 and everything's going to be fine. I think there still is an aspect of you behaving in a way or reacting in a different way that's still helpful there. But I think for some people, there could certainly be a neurotransmitter element that is leading them down certain pathways brain-wise that might perpetuate like a very hypervigilant or anxious mentality or state where, that's not necessarily going to be as conducive for healing and getting better gut-wise if your body's scanning all the time, or, you're hyper-focused, hyper-vigilant, or extra reactive when you have a symptom, that kind of stuff.
And if there's tension, too, like I associate anxiety and stress with tension. And we tend to think of it as like, oh, I'm shrugging my shoulders and I'm balling my hands up into fists and I'm clenching my jaw. But a lot of people also get like abdominal tension when they're stressed. Their stomach is tied up in knots. Yeah. And there's that kind of element too, is like if you're anxious all the time, or if you're super, super stressed all the time and you're having a hard time like regulating your brain chemistry and regulating your mood, that could also lead to tension in the body, and that can either exacerbate symptoms or cause symptoms too.
For sure.
And it makes it harder for you to follow through with advice. How many times, Amy, how many times have we wanted to tear our hair out by the roots because we feel like we have the world's best advice and like, oh, we know exactly what needs to happen and we just need the patient to implement and then they're going to be good. And like, we feel like we've explained it well and it's thought out and they don't follow through with the advice. And sometimes it's because they're having a hard time making that work in their life, right? Like we gave them this great meal plan, but it didn't account for the fact that they work 60 hours a week and they have 3 kids. And like, there's that element. But I think for a pretty fair number of people that I've worked with, they don't follow through seemingly because they're so terrified. Yeah. Like they don't introduce the 1 new food a week or whatever it might be, or they don't try the new supplement because they are petrified of what that thing is going to do to them if they react poorly to it. And so alleviating the anxiety a bit or helping with your mood and your mental health can help you execute all of these good ideas that you have, or all of these good ideas that you've been given. Right.
And I will say, if you are one of those people that feel like you are like terrified and afraid to like make a wrong step, that's probably the first thing you should probably try to figure out, whether it's kind of needing mental health support, or again, maybe there is true deficiency in your diet all around, which I would say should be the first step. I think a lot can go haywire if we're nutritionally depleted, B6 being one of those things. But it's going to be really hard to make progress if you're feeling like you're sort of in that highly urgent, anxious, like frantic type state, which I've been there in my own gut journey. So you definitely can work your way out. But having kind of the right support, whether that's like more nutritionally or mental health support, I think is super important.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we might be nearing everything that I had to say about vitamin B6, but I had two other things to briefly share.
I have one other thing.
Okay.
Thing.
Do you want to lead with yours? And then because I've got mine on my screen and next to me, so I won't forget mine.
Yeah. The only other thing, and I would say this is probably going to happen in more extreme B6 deficiency or like an outright deficiency. B6 was really helpful for helping us pull glucose from our liver, so like from glycogen stores, or pull glucose from like muscle that's being stored there during exercise. So again, if someone is having more severe blood sugar dips, I even think like having a lot of blood sugar issues even at night when we're not eating and there's a lot, you're relying on the glycogen stores in the liver to fuel your blood sugar. Yeah, and cortisol. So if you're kind of waking up frequently at night, I mean, it could even be a melatonin. There could be neurotransmitter things that play there, but there also could even be blood sugar stuff if you feel like you wake up very frequently in the middle of the night. B6 could be more involved just because, again, it's so important for releasing the stored glucose in your liver into the bloodstream to maintain blood sugar while we're not eating at night. So that's just something to kind of keep in mind too. I have a lot of people that fall into that bracket, and I would say more often than not, it's a calorie thing. Like they're not getting enough calories or carbs to fill up their glycogen stores. That's more of the bigger issue. So if you're definitely not getting enough calories or carbs in, I would experiment there first. But if you feel like you've done that and you're getting kind of sufficient fuel in, and it doesn't make sense why you're waking up frequently in the middle of the night, and there's kind of no other explanations, it could potentially be like more of a B6 issue.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I will share too, like going kind of tying in with what you just said, but kind of not. Your muscle is the main storage site for B6 in the body. At least according to my textbook, they estimate like 75 to 85% of the B6 storage in the body is in the muscles. And, the body doesn't just do things willy-nilly. There's virtually always a good reason for stuff like this. Like we were talking about in, I believe, the last nutrient episode, we were talking about how most of the B5 in the body is stored in like the liver and the kidney and why that might be. So here you're hearing this like really big number, this really big percentage of B6 stored in the muscles. And again, I think it's because it's involved in that glycogen, the glycogen stores and the pulling out of the glycogen, which a lot of which is in your muscles and a good amount of it is in your liver as well. The other thing that I think we haven't mentioned yet, but when we were talking about populations that are at higher risk of deficiency, another group of people is the elderly. And again, I think that this probably is going to be across the board for most nutrients because you start getting lower and lower stomach acid production, lower and lower appetite, like especially super old people. They tend to eat like little birds and they just eat like 3 pecks and then they're like, oh, I'm stuffed. Yeah. And it's just hard to get a lot of nutrition into old folks in general. So, but that is a population where not only are they probably not taking in enough of this nutrient, but also, again, old age is going to be associated with, again, like digestive juice secretion changes, maybe some leaky gut, and oftentimes a decrease in muscle mass.
Yeah.
And if you simply don't have the bulk, the muscle, like if you have fewer pounds of muscle on your frame, that means you have fewer storage sites for the B6 to hang out, right? Like who's going to have a greater capacity to store B6? Arnold Schwarzenegger in his prime with like muscles on top of muscles on top of muscles, or like a frail little old granny who's, this big around like a little toothpick of a human being, and she has almost no muscle on her body.
Yeah. And it almost makes me think of now like Ozempic being really popular, and the tricky part about the Ozempic equation is that it does deplete muscle mass. But even some of our patients that are likely not doing Ozempic or any of the GLP-1s, it's like if they're losing muscle mass because they're losing weight and they're not getting enough to eat, it's like,
or you're just stone cold sedentary too. Like there is such a thing as skinny fat. Like you wouldn't know looking at people that they are essentially like having too much adipose tissue. But if you did a scan and, you take the couch potatoes and you look at how much muscle mass they actually have, you can be skinny fat.
True.
And I feel like that is a pretty good majority of the folks that we see in the IBS space too, is that they either, maybe they just haven't ever really adopted an exercise routine or they've never prioritized it. Or if they did previously do an exercise routine or a sport, they've put it on the back burner because they feel like they need to focus all of their time and energy on the healing. And it's one of those like, oh, I will play tennis again when I'm better. Right. I will play basketball again when I'm better. I will go to the gym again when I'm better. Right. And so, this is a little bit more theoretical spitballing, admittedly, but again, I think it makes sense that like the more muscle you have, the more storage capacity you have for this nutrient. And that segues into the points that I wanted to make, which will be, I think, our grand finale, if I may.
Yeah.
So this, I think, was it on the podcast? I haven't recorded the YouTube video yet, but did I tell you I really want to record a YouTube video? And I'm gonna make it a clickbaity title, and it's gonna be something like "Carnivore is exactly like the vegan diet." Did I tell you about this topic?
I don't think so.
Oh,
no.
Oh, I'm so excited. So I'll briefly tell you this first, and then I'll read this passage. So the point that I'm going to make in that video, which hopefully will be posted by the time this episode comes out, is that I think that there's no denying that a lot of people feel better in the short term when they do carnivore, right? Like we've seen so many people come to us and they're like, well, I had bloating and I had all of these problems and then I did carnivore and then all of my bloating went away. And, you know, some people believe that it's because they're starving the SIBO. Some people believe that all plants are evil. I don't know. But my point is, as much as I vehemently despise the carnivore diet in my heart of hearts, and I think it is the dumbest diet I've ever heard in my entire life, I can't deny that a lot of people feel better on it when they do it. So that creates a disconnect in my brain, right? Of like, oh, there's this thing that I think is hella dumb and I hate very much, but also I can't deny that it has some effect.
Right.
So like, how does that work? And so what I
kind of called like cognitive dissonance or something? I feel like
yeah, right. So what I think, this is how I've grappled with it. What I think is happening and where my concern comes from is I think it could be a temporary Band-Aid in a very similar way to the low FODMAP or any of these quote unquote SIBO diets, right? If you have dysmotility and maybe SIBO and, you know, you're having, you know, and visceral hypersensitivity, if you have some of these issues and then you restrict FODMAPs, you can feel better. But we also know the long-term implication of the low FODMAP diet is greater dysbiosis and like lesser microbial diversity. So again, it's another diet where you feel good in the moment, but it should only be used as a short-term Band-Aid because the longer you use it, the more you're going to wipe out your microbiome. And so I feel like the carnivore diet is kind of like the ultimate version of that, where it's like, oh, you just cut out literally everything. And of course you get this like anti-allergenic almost too, because if you think about a lot of food allergies and food sensitivities, a lot of them are plant foods, right? Like gluten-containing grain, soy, corn. So you basically go on this like super duper mega insane hypoallergenic low fiber diet. And so your symptoms feel better in the moment and you band-aided them successfully. But my concern with it is what's going to happen to your microbiome and your cardiovascular health and your health overall and your mental health the longer you do a diet like this. And that's where my concern comes from is I think there's going to be, I hope that I'm wrong, just for the record. I would never wish ill on anybody. But I really fear that in a few years, we're going to start hearing more and more stories of carnivore eaters dropping dead of a stroke, dropping dead of a heart attack, or getting, you know, horrible incurable C. diff or colitis or colon cancer because of this diet. And they confused this idea of short-term symptomatic relief versus what is actually healthy for the human being to use for an extended period of time.
Right.
And I feel like it's the same shit that happens with the vegan diet. I've heard so many people who are like, oh, I went from a standard American diet to a vegan diet and I felt amazing.
Yeah.
My mental health improved. My skin cleared up. I was pooping like a champion. Everything was beautiful roses and puppies and rainbows. But we've also met a lot of people who have been vegan or vegetarian for years and years and years, and they have anemia. They're iron deficient. Their hair, skin, and nails are terrible. They're taking high-dose biotin because their hair is falling out. They have fatigue. They have GI issues. They have low stomach acid. Like they have all of these potential consequences of the nutrient deficiencies that come a little bit later.
Right.
Right. So like in the example of vegan, you go from standard American diet, which is horrible in so many ways, to a vegan diet, well, you're getting fiber for the first time in your entire life. You're getting plant diversity for the first time in your entire life. You're getting like folate and these nutrients that your body has probably never seen before. Like, of course you feel better in the short term adopting that diet. It is arguably healthier than the standard American diet. I wouldn't deny that. But also what happens when the B12 deficiency, the iron deficiency, the zinc deficiency, the protein deficiency start to set in? What happens when you start going to more of those meetup groups and more of those Facebook groups and you start preaching the gospel of the vegan diet and you alienate friends and family because you become the preachy vegan person and it's impacting your social life? And so it's like you can feel better in a short span of time, but that does not mean it's the world's most perfect diet. And that does not mean that it is well suited for long-term use. And I feel like that's what's happening with carnivore. I feel like they feel good in the short term. And now all of these people are saying that this is the God's greatest gift to nutrition. And we were born to just be carnivores.
Right.
And I'm like, ooh, I think you're making the same mistake that the vegans have made for a couple of decades now.
Yeah. Well, I feel like it's a good point even to flip it on its head. The hard part, I think, about people grappling with the need to optimize their nutrition is that it's not an overnight thing. Unless maybe like if there is a true iron deficiency and you get on an iron supplement or something, like I could see you feeling better fairly quickly. But like most of the time, really optimizing your nutrition, you might not see the effects for a bit. So like that's hard to grapple with, I think, in the culture that we live in and just the need for immediate gratification.
Human brains. Yeah, we all want immediate results.
The human brain is struggling with that. But I think, yeah, especially in this wellness space that's very protocol-y and like, oh, you should be better in a month. It's like, well, it's going to take it some time to optimize your nutrition. And I think just giving it time, I think it's more of the extreme examples that you're giving, like the carnivore vegan it's interesting to see like, oh, it's going to take time for nutrition to really fall off. I think it takes time for nutrition to be restored post.
Well, and that's where I get to this. One of the things I wanted to share here is this book made a point of saying signs of vitamin B6 deficiency, which can occur in as little as 2 to 3 weeks, but may take up to 2.5 months. So, again, like thinking, okay, we have somebody who is on a restrictive diet and initially they feel better. And initially they have the B6 storage, they have the iron, they have the whatever, that initially they're not feeling the pain of that deficiency because they're relying on their storage and they can get away with that for a period of time. But again, the longer you do these restrictive diets, and it could be, I don't care if it's like a low histamine diet, AIP, low FODMAP, SCD, like I don't give a crap. All of them, the longer you do a restrictive diet, the more likely it is that you're going to see symptoms and problems from one of these overt deficiencies. And if you look, so I pulled up an NIH page with foods that contain B6. The top, I'm going to go from number 1 down the list a little ways. Chickpeas is actually their number 1 that they list. Low FODMAP, right? Like that's eliminated for a lot of people we talk to. Beef liver, always the damn beef liver at the top. I tell you. Yellowfin tuna, sockeye salmon, chicken breast, fortified breakfast cereals. Oh, none of our listeners eat that. No. Yeah. That's like riddled with glyphosate. It's processed food. Never. Potatoes. Well, that's carbs. You can't eat the carbs. Turkey meat, banana. Well, that's just chock full of sugar. Why would you eat a banana? But my marinara sauce, spaghetti sauce. Well, that's histamine. You can't do that. So my point is there are so many of these foods that are commonly eliminated on restrictive diets, right? If you eliminate meat and seafood, you just eliminated like 8 out of the 10 top sources of this vitamin. If you're on the low FODMAP diet, or heaven forbid you're doing like low FODMAP, low carb, you just eliminated chickpeas, potatoes, banana. If you're doing low histamine, you're probably eliminating some of these protein sources or eating less of them. You're eliminating bananas, you're eliminating the spaghetti sauce. So I think that there is again, about 25% of the population is under consuming this nutrient, but I think that that number is probably much higher in populations that are doing restrictive diets. So that is the grand finale that I wanted to end us on.
I love it.
So
And I agree.
Reintroduce your food, people.
Yes.
Broad diet, eat all the things. Omnivore is the way to go. And if you need help with that, either Amy or I would be able to help you. So reach out to us.
For sure.
That's what we help people with. So, all right. I think that is a wrap, though. We will look forward to the next episode of the nutrient series, which is going to be vitamin B7, biotin. We're going to debunk some myths in the hair, skin, and nail world. So prepare yourself for that. And we will see you back here next time for another guest episode on the IBS Freedom Podcast. Until then, take care.